All right, we're back with another NZ Aviation podcast. Been a couple of weeks. Seems like quite a sort of good frequency every maybe week and a half, 2 weeks. Martin Noakes joins me from what? Brizzy? Martin, Brizzy?
Brizzy, yeah. Autumnal Brizzy.
And we're going to hear those birds galahing off in the background again.
No, you might hear some plovers. It's dark, but the plovers are still out in the dark.
Aren't they the ones that fly all the way to the Arctic, or is that the one that we have? I know I've heard stories recently about the plover going via Japan and then up to the Arctic. They're only little things.
No, this is not. I don't think this is a real plover. Locals just call them plovers. And I think everyone wishes they would fly to the Arctic because they're noisy.
All right. Well, actually, I shouldn't laugh. Not much to laugh about. We've got to start this podcast with the Superjet crash at Moscow. My golly, what a horrible crash. That thing from all angles has been covered. We've seen that bounce landing and that incredibly hard second landing, and must have obviously put the gears through the tank, something like that. Have you ever seen video like that before, Martin? Wow.
No, the coverage is amazing, isn't it? It's yes, it'll be very helpful to the accident investigators, perhaps.
I've been reading up on things on Herald. They talk about the aircraft being hit by lightning, though really not too much of a description on what that could have done to the aircraft. Have you heard or read anything?
Well, the subsequent reports I've read have said that it wasn't lightning and that it was a short circuit in the wiring in the plane.
Okay. Well, as of, what are we recording this on Tuesday evening? Right. I got it. So, an electrical fire on board, and obviously they knew about that, and they were, trying to get back, obviously. Yeah.
They almost immediately after takeoff, they signaled that there was a problem and they were coming back, and they came back and, didn't go well.
Yeah, so that initial landing that resulted in the bounce, it really didn't look that uncontrolled. It's hard to tell the vertical speed. Obviously, it was pretty high for the bounce to happen, or maybe the pilots were not able to control, elevators? Maybe they were using, this is all speculation, of course, and it's dangerous, but thrust or something to control it, because, trying to explain that bounce.
Yes, there could have been issues. It's fly-by-wire. Maybe there was a certain loss of control. I don't know. But there again, if I was a pilot and the back half of the plane was on fire, I'd probably smash it down to the ground as soon as I could.
Yeah. So that means that the fire was quite well developed, maybe, because the fuel that came out of the wings, presumably, I mean, that was an eruption of fire. And
yes, it was, wasn't it? It really took off. Yeah. But again, I mean, you slam the gears through the wings, it ruptures the tanks. You still got some forward airspeed. It sprays the back of the plane, and that's terrible. Just terrible. It must have been awful being in it.
Mind you, if you had a fire already in progress inside the aircraft at the same time, that may exacerbate the outside condition, with all that fuel around.
They've had a few reading up on because I've kind of been following the Sukhoi Superjet ever since I read a very interesting article by the chief aerodynamicist on the program as to why they chose relatively low bypass turbines or turbofans. And he said, as you've said once before on the old 737-200, that really on shorter legs, high bypass doesn't really make a huge difference. And this guy said, we chose the wing that doesn't have a huge sweep angle, that the turbofans don't have a very high bypass angle because the plane has been optimized for up to 2-hour legs. And he says that it's actually very economical. But then subsequent to that, you read all sorts of issues with, they've been desperately trying to reduce the cost of that plane because the development costs 4 times more than it was budgeted.
Oh, okay.
And they've it was an interesting program. There was a lot of foreign cooperation. SNECMA worked with the engine makers to come up with the engine. The fly-by-wire system was done in conjunction with a French company, although it is mainly Russian. The Messier Doughty did the undercarriage. Boeing did the project management and the documentation. And it appears that they just didn't have a handle on the costs of what involving all these foreign partners would do. They underestimated the hours required.
And what does that suggest?
Well, that the program will never ever make money, and maybe they've kind of rushed the production to try. There's 162 of them flying. They need to sell about 400 to make any money or to even get their costs back, and that looks increasingly unlikely. They are going ahead with a Sukhoi Superjet 130, which will carry a few more people, and that'll have a composite wing. But whether or not that actually sees the light of day, unlikely. The foreign operators, there's a carrier in Mexico, I think it's Aero Mexico. They seem pretty happy with it.
It's another company. It's something Jet. It's got that sort of name to it. We'll look it up. But I think they sold 100 to them.
Yeah. They haven't taken 100, but by all accounts, they're pretty happy with them. But the cost of support is, Sukhoi's basically had to put a whole team in Mexico to make sure that they're reliable.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at. I'm trying to find the name of the airline. Oh, yes, here we go. Interjet.
Okay, yeah, Mexican carrier Interjet.
And I think the Irish carrier, is it CityJet, also fly them.
Okay. Yeah, and
sure.
I read a report by the Mexican airline, and they said it's actually it hits the numbers. They're happy with it and everything, but the amount of support required from Sukhoi was quite disturbing because the other aircraft don't need that much specialized support.
And remember, there was that accident early on in Indonesia on a promotional flight. I think 45 people were killed. It flew into a mountain. I don't think it was the fault of the aircraft, but it wasn't a good start.
Well, they ignored the ground proximity warning.
Oh, never recommended.
No.
I guess they'll want to find out. The Russian authorities have opened an investigation. 41 occupants of the aircraft. That's 40 passengers and one crew dead. I guess that's because probably most of the crew were in the forward part of the fuselage.
Yeah. Most people were probably in the forward part of the fuselage at that point. The
flight data recorder, it says here, was exposed to intense heat and was substantially damaged. Specialists are dismantling the recorder and preparing the storage media for copying the data. Well, as long as the data's okay, I guess. Yeah. And there was criticism also, and I think there's video evidence of it as well. People departing the chutes with their personal effects, and I think that's been noticed by. And there's been some mention of that maybe that delayed the evacuation. But I mean, looking at those flames, if you're down the back of that aircraft for even a short amount of time, you would have been in a very bad situation, I'd say.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, but let's move on to that, and we'll stay with crashes, unfortunately. But did you see that video? There's one of the few mainstream media items of coverage into the 737 MAX problem, let's call it, nightmare, disaster, whatever word you want to use, on TV. I think it was one of the Aussie current affairs shows, and they were in a simulator, 737-800 simulator by the looks of things, but with looked like a legitimate pilot showing the effect of this MCAS system going rogue. Wow, that showed you how terrible it must have been.
Yes. So, yes, you get 5 seconds between MCAS reactivating and pushing the nose down 40 degrees for 10 seconds, while the pilots are desperately trying to go through a checklist which doesn't actually address the problem.
Yeah, talk about snookered. Talk about checkmate, right?
Yes, really. And it turns out the Ethiopian Airlines pilots were doing all that they could. You know what I mean? They were following the procedures as they understood them.
Yeah, one thing I noticed from that simulation was that that those time intervals, 5 seconds of disconnect, followed by 10 seconds of the system reactivating and putting you back where you were, then another 5 seconds after you've disconnected it that it gives it back to you. Every time was not enough time to recover, so eventually you're going to hit the ground.
Yes. Yes, especially when you're coming out of Addis Ababa, which is pretty high anyway, and the terrain's pretty high around you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably, as you've said before, and other people are beginning to say now, there was an interesting article by an aviation legal expert that I read yesterday. He says there's probably going to be homicide charges.
Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me. There's been quite a bit of coverage going around. I saw a Seattle Times piece a few days ago that was looking at why the board or the circumstances around the board signing off the project and the way it was going to be done. And a couple of board members who I think are ex-board members now who were there at the time, this is back in 2012, right? They were surprisingly, I don't know if it was the way the article was written or whatever, but surprisingly unapologetic, that they would do it again, make the same decision to go with the way the program was set up again, because everything was made in a very compressed time frame, eh?
Really quick. It is basically 737-800 refreshed to make it competitive with a NEO, do whatever we can to make it competitive with the NEO, which included the new engines, which caused the plane to be unstable. So we'll slap an MCAS system in, won't tell anybody about it because that'll make us have to go back and recertify large parts of the plane, and we'll put an extra 10 seats in it to bring the seat mile cost down to within the range of a NEO. Although I've been reading some very interesting reports about Boeing maintain that the 737 MAX is 6% more fuel efficient than the NEO. And if you read on airliners.net, and there's a couple of German ones that I read, they say it's not 6%. And that's why Boeing have been cramming as many people into it as possible to get the seat mile cost down. The total overall cost might well be below a NEO if you're already a large 737 operator, because they were they were saying the whole way through the development it's exactly the same as a 737-8. There's no training requirements, because if you've got, like Southwest got a couple of thousand pilots, and you have to put them through a training regime, right? It's simulator time and all this type of thing. That'll eat into a lot of benefits. So they were constantly saying, no, it's exactly the same. Don't worry about it. And it takes 10, 12, 15 people more. That'll make you money. And it would. However, they were completely glossing over the fact that it needed quite large changes to be safe, ironically, and they in order not to draw attention to the changes they were making, they pretty much glossed over them, to the point that it turns out that Boeing didn't even know, or parts of Boeing weren't even aware, that the warning light that tells you when you've got a disagreement between the two sensors, because there's an angle of attack sensor on both sides, and there's a light that can go on to tell you when they disagree. Not all of Boeing was aware that light was optional. So the light was there, and American Airlines believed that light worked. They weren't aware that the models they'd ordered didn't actually work.
Crikey, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking,
interesting.
I was just thinking as you were making that point, I mean, if you think of airlines like Southwest Airlines and even, Lion Air, they've ordered, 180 of them or something like that, something crazy. And I guess Ryanair will look to the MAX to replace their 800 fleet. What's that, 300 or something aircraft? It's a mind-boggling amount. Surely these airlines are full of experienced engineers who know the legacy models so well. You'd think they'd have a few questions. Even just looking at the MAX front on, it bears no resemblance to earlier 737s. You can just see it from looking at it. The engines are gigantic. They sit quite high up above the leading edge of the wing. Very clever engineering. But do you think those airlines or the people who think of engineering in those airlines, do you think they could have said, "Hey, wait on, you're saying it's going to be just like a normal 737, but how can it be? We're looking at it. You're going to have those engines are going to cause issues for a start." And isn't it incumbent on them to ask those questions and make those points?
I don't know, but they may well have asked those questions and gone back to their trusted vendor, and the vendor would have said, "No, of course it isn't. Or we've done it."
So, but without telling them what they've done to
nothing. We don't need to. Wow. It's all good.
Gosh, okay, geez. But you'd think that there would be some thought given to that inside a large airline like Southwest. How many 737s have they owned since they've been going? Hundreds, maybe in the thousands now.
Thousands, because they're running a fleet of 723, so they've probably got what? Let's say they've probably got 4,000 to 5,000 pilots, right?
Oh, easy. And
more than that, probably 6,000 or 7,000, because you need two.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. So maybe even more than that. They are a big operation. They've operated everything from the 200, every version basically except the 900. They've operated. So
yeah,
you'd think that they would have some real, skin in the game.
And they are really upset. It's those guys are really upset with it.
So Boeing must have done a great sales job on even the real, like Americans, another example. They've got hundreds of these. Yeah. Mind you, they've owned hundreds of 737s that have never given them a problem. So why should this one?
Why would you just trust them? And it's also interesting. It is interesting how things start coming out of the woodwork when something like this happens. Unfortunately, there's that story where the test pilots group within Boeing has said they felt they've been steadily sidelined over the last 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and sort of, don't go off and do the old school testing. Test this and tell us how it went, and don't tell us anything else because we're not interested.
I think we were talking earlier in the week, and you made the point that they don't test pilots, but Boeing test pilots anyway. They're not wearing the orange overalls and the parachutes on their back, mind you, when they went and test flew the 747 and stuff, the guys were wearing suits, I suppose, but Airbus are a lot more obvious, aren't they, in the way they dress up their test pilots?
Yeah, they're wearing crash helmets and parachutes.
It looks, maybe that's for effect, but it certainly looks the part. Yeah.
It's shocking, actually, and it's the unrelenting rise of project management. As I was saying to someone else the other day, you work for an engineering company, and I worked for an engineering company in Germany that got taken over by a big multinational, and we went from being an engineering company supported by management to a management company with a few engineers that happened to make stuff, but that really kind of got in the way.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge culture change, because I think Boeing, in the absolute heyday, were engineering driven.
Absolutely, they all were, and then they moved the headquarters to. McDonnell Douglas performed that reverse takeover in effect. You had the McDonnell Douglas senior management take over.
Yeah, how did that work? How did they manage to do that?
That was very interesting. Yeah. There's books written about that, and then they moved the headquarters to Chicago.
Yeah.
The corporate headquarters moved to Chicago, and there's always been this and it's inevitable. To me, it seems to be inevitable with engineering companies. The once the management get the upper hand, and management's important. Obviously, management's important, but there tends to be a sort of backlash against. And I guess if you've got an MBA. Excuse me to all the MBAs out there, both of them. If you've got an MBA or you're a management, it's nice to have one up on the engineers, because the engineers are always coming to tell you, "Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, we need more money,
the naysayers, need more people, need more money,
need more analysis,
more time.
I get shot down in my work because I'm always saying, we need more time, we need more data, and what I do is not important. But I've often locked horns with people who said, "No, just do it." And I said, "Well, I don't feel comfortable doing it because I don't think it's going to work." Oh, it doesn't matter; it just needs to work enough.
Yeah, and we'll tell people what they need to hear.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so let's watch that space legally, see what happens, and if any heads roll. I wonder which ones will, who they're going to be.
See, Air Canada came out today and they said, we think it's going to be on the ground longer than anticipated.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're all talking. Emirates now, the regional arm of Emirates, and Air Canada said, we're going to need a lot more compensation. I mean, Air Canada is saying, we've lost 7% of our summer capacity.
Wow. Well, I see it's cost Boeing. I saw the $1 billion figure a couple of days ago, but that's just the start, surely. I mean, even locally, you've got Fiji Airways. They've had to bring in replacement airliners.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
Boeing, I guess, pays for that, but you imagine them having to do that with hundreds.
That bill's going to go straight, and no matter how they pay it, whether they do cash or discounts, it's going to affect them for the next
but then you
years.
say, hey, what I'm getting is an aircraft. This is this is what I'm going to be fascinated with. You've got carriers who have to accept an aircraft that may have a negative customer perception, and even getting it cheap with massive discounts may still be a problem.
Yeah. Yes. They've got an uphill struggle to, which is why at the corporate level they're not admitting culpability. And there was that very insensitive tweet that came out about, I don't know, it would have been about 4 or 5 weeks ago, just after the accident. We're going to make a few changes to make an already safe plane even safer.
Yeah, well, that's the way you spin it, and I guess they'll call it the Ultra or something. It just reminded me, I watched an interview the other day with Niki Lauda. Some guy Niki Lauda, and he was talking about the Lauda Air 767 crash out of Bangkok.
Yes.
And he said, he described the whole thing, got this phone call in the middle of the night, and they hadn't heard, I think it was his ops center saying, we haven't heard from the aircraft. And it sort of developed like that. And he went to the crash site, and he saw it, and he said one engine was in the jungle over there, and then the other engine was, I think about 200 or 300 meters away, or maybe even further than that, a couple of miles. Anyway, he said he noticed. Well, first of all the locals were pillaging the bodies. My God! But he noticed that one of the engine's thrust reversers was deployed.
Yes.
And made a note of that, and of course, Boeing came out and. The inspectors arrived and all that. And he said he got a call from Boeing, and they said, we've found out what happened. Come over to Seattle and we'll show you. So we went to Seattle, and they'd set up one of those engines on a test rig, fully equipped. And apparently the failure of an O-ring in the thrust reverser mechanism meant that the thrust reverser deployed, and that was the fault. That's what had happened. And he said, okay, well, I have to tell all the affected people immediately. And they said, oh no, you can't do that. We have to design. Basically, what he said is Boeing had to design the appropriate language to be able to announce it. And it would take 2 to 3 months. And he said, no, that's unacceptable, and sort of like monstered them, heavied them, and managed to get them to agree to write a preliminary thing, which he released, I think, the next day. But they were incredibly reluctant. It was all about preserving your image, and they basically had to put a news release out that I guess didn't absolve them, but described the problem, but minimized the perception of who it was to blame and all that sort of stuff. So they're automatically in that mode all the time, aren't they? The big corporates.
Yeah.
Denial.
Yes, denial. Well, don't admit it. Don't admit it. And I think it's a shame, really, because no one. Everyone would hope things are perfect, but people are quite capable of handling that stuff happens, and I think you just make it worse by doing that.
But surely a basic question would be that MCAS system. What if the angle of attack mechanism system breaks? It has before. Not too long ago. Look what happened to Air France 447, was it?
No. I think it's worse than that. I think there's 416 instances of angle of attack sensors on Boeing's failing.
Well, there you go. So, well-worn road. That should have been top of mind in any assessment of the system. And then next question is, well, what happens if it fails? What happens to MCAS then?
Well, remember after Lion Air, Southwest Airlines replaced all their angle of attack sensors on their planes. And that's when they found out, apparently, that the light telling you about the disagreement wasn't connected.
Ah, right.
Yeah, so they were already having these discussions before the Ethiopian Air accident, and apparently Boeing knew it was an issue a year before the Lion Air accident.
Yeah, well, surely who would investigate that? The FBI, I suppose, would they?
If you've got 5,000 planes on order and you've sold those 5,000 planes on the basis that they are exactly the same operationally as the ones you're replacing, there'd be an awful lot of hand-wringing as to how that would be admitted. And when you've got a various fiefdoms across a large organization, although there's a lot of people who want to do the right thing, if it follows its natural path, it's very easy to obfuscate and slow stuff like that down. I was watching a very interesting video. It's nothing to do with airplanes, Paul. There's this guy, and people listening to this might be interested. It's worth watching. He's on YouTube. He's a guy called Sandy Munro, and he's a crusty old Detroit veteran, a powertrain engineer. And he has a company called Sandy Munro and Associates. And this explains a bit of corporate culture. And what he does is BMW will give him a brief. They'll say, listen, go and grab the new Lexus, take it to pieces, tell us what they've done good, tell us what they've done bad, tell us what they need to improve, and then take one of our cars apart of a comparable model, do the same thing, and we'll compare these two things. And he's done that for the Tesla, right? And he's an old petrol guy, right? Petrol head. And he took the first Tesla apart, and he said it was rubbish. He said it's, from a body perspective, and he does reports, body, powertrain, and other things. So the first one he did was the body, and he took his Tesla apart, and he says, from a body perspective, it's actually not that good. It looks beautiful, it's super safe, but they've put a lot more metal in that body than they actually need to, as far as he can tell, right? Blah, blah, blah. But then he went into the rest of the car, and he worked out that, man, these guys are making their own seats. These guys are making their own coolant bottles, and it ends into a discussion that it's vertically integrated. And he says the reason Tesla is so successful is because they are highly vertically integrated. That company is responsible for everything. They don't release anything until they've done it themselves. And because they're a new and they're a modern company, they haven't let these fiefdoms develop. And I reckon what's happened with Boeing, and what happens with a lot of big companies, Boeing's by the by, like let's say Siemens. Siemens has got so much duplication because now you've got a vice president of this and a vice president of that, all doing essentially exactly the same thing, but for different, what they would call divisions in the company. We wouldn't know the difference. They seem to be doing exactly the same thing. And in a company like Boeing, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. MCAS might have been done by a group that didn't tell anybody what they were doing because they didn't feel they had to. It might have even been outsourced to another division, a separate division of Boeing. And so the software rocks up and so, you got to integrate it. What does it do? Don't worry about it, just integrate it. Yeah, all right. My job's integrating, not testing.
Wow. Well, it seems like, in that case, a total breakdown in any common sense, for crying out loud.
Well, not common sense, Paul. It's
well, no, but if
corporate expediency.
But if you're making machines that people fly in at hundreds of miles an hour, and if they crap out, everyone dies, you'd hope that at least someone would say, well, okay, how does this? What happens if the angle of attack sensor goes nuts?
It's someone else's problem. You know what I mean? That's the terrible thing.
Incredible to think that it could be like that.
It's how these big organizations. Yeah, they distributed responsibility because it's all about avoiding responsibility, right?
Well, direct responsibility. If you can, if you can apportion it around enough places, you could dissipate to the point where there's no actual personal impact. as such. No one loses their jobs.
Covering.
Well, if this is the case for Boeing, if they're in this situation, they're at a bit of a watershed moment, because now they've got that 777X thing coming on. I mean, what's going to happen? They can start making those. This thing's going to pile up while FAA decide whether they grandfather this thing in on the 300ER or whatever it was, or the original one. Or, okay, we're not going to go here again. You're going to have to... recertify this, and it might be close to certifying an aircraft from scratch. I mean, it could be a big problem. Big problem.
It could be a big problem, yeah. And I think the 777X might well have. It might not delay the program significantly, but they might have a lot more people looking over everybody's shoulders.
Well, because it's
not a bad thing.
Because it's fly-by-wire fundamentally, it's probably software management within that system is a lot easier, you would say, to integrate, right? Because what they're trying to do is make a manual aircraft, like you were saying early on, and overlaying it with some sort of pseudo alpha floor protection sort of concept that. It didn't work out, did it? So,
and I do agree. I think the 777, certainly from a flight control perspective, might well be easier, because it's very easy to simulate and emulate.
Yeah, but still, there might be a level of cautiousness now in the system that it's not. They will have to do more than they originally planned. We'll see.
And it also comes down to the major mechanical differences. So, okay, it's got a carbon fiber wing, but we're grandfathering it on the old side. So, hang on, guys, that's a completely different wing. No, we'll have to check it much more.
What happened with the 747-8? Did they? Because that's a whole new wing. What did they have to do?
Well, they didn't have an accident.
Yeah, but did they have to? What sort of recertifying on a new wing did they?
No, I think it came in under the 747 general type.
It's a completely different wing.
Yeah, but the 747-400 was completely different from the 200, wasn't it?
Well, not really. The flap system
8
was.
Wings.
Oh, okay. Anyway. All right. Well, that is a developing story. Hasn't gone away yet, and it's anyone's guess as to when they will be flying those Maxes again. Let's come back home before we talk about Air New Zealand and China, which will probably get us talking about trade setups. Bearing in mind don't we have a free trade agreement with these people, but trade relationships in general. I want to start with this story. It's reported today. Woman removed from Air New Zealand flight after failing to comply with crew instructions is the headline in Stuff. Now, just bear with for a few moments. Police had to remove a woman from an Air New Zealand flight in Wellington after she reportedly refused to watch the airline's safety video. I wonder why. Air New Zealand said the woman was removed from the flight at Wellington Airport after delaying the aircraft's departure to Auckland. The plane had to return to the gate after the passenger failed to comply with crew instructions. A police spokeswoman said police were requested to meet the passenger at the airport Tuesday morning. They'll receive an infringement notice under Civil Aviation Authority rules relating to the use of a cell phone. And a passenger on board the plane told News Hub the delay was caused by the woman refusing to watch the safety video before takeoff. There's a quote here from the passenger. I have to say that if watching the safety video is so crucial and you can be escorted off the plane, maybe Air New Zealand should stop making Rachel Hunter ice cream ad safety videos, the passenger said.
Well, there is that.
Just make a short video that's compulsory to watch and let people know if they don't watch the video, the police will come and take them away. Well, that sounds overly officious. And you know what? I think that... sometimes flight attendants can get a little crotchety because the last thing they want to see most days is people, probably, particularly towards the end of the day. And you've got to be careful of the optics of this. I wonder if the use of the cell phone was the passenger in question videoing the event, or making a cell phone call to someone saying, hey, who knows? Or maybe. If you're
gonna chuck people off the plane, especially those domestic flights, for not watching the safety video, most Air New Zealand flights would leave it 2/3 empty.
Well, that's what I say. This is an officious sort of response. And again, Air New Zealand, be careful.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know I'm actually quite surprised at how many people just carry on reading their iPads and that.
But here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, Martin. Imagine being coercively made to watch their crappy video.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like an insult to your intelligence.
Yes. I mean, I'm half expecting from the last safety videos, or the one I remember most, is if there's an accident, I'll reach under my seat and then there's a fish under there for some reason. Or a kiwi in the overhead locker.
Yeah, or what was that guy?
Or whatever.
That dancer guy, the fitness
Richard
guy.
Simmons.
Yeah, yes, he's a blow-up version of him under there that you can put around your waist.
Yeah, it's just those videos are...
Here's some advice. Grow up, get serious, and make the safety video the solemn thing that it should be. Make it as quickly as possible. No one wants to watch the thing for longer than anything. It's spent as an entertainment vehicle. It's gone. You've done it. You overdid it.
I mean, I get I understand why they did it, but it would have been a thing once a year would have been good. Once a year for 3 weeks, but make sure it gets the relevant information across, because some of them, I'm not sure entirely what they're getting across. And listen, I don't want to go on about it, but I think they're a bit stupid, actually.
Yeah, well, when you're worried about losing market share and people forward
that's not going to get you market share, mate. I'm not going to pay $300 more to watch a dumb video.
Well, that's the thing. So have a bit of humility and reflect on maybe how things are looking, but this is not a good look for them. I mean, just like I'm not going to spend $2,000 extra to fly business class with Air New Zealand, so some poor sap has to dress up in a black chef's uniform. I remember
to serve me my airline food.
Yeah, I remember once. I think I was on. I can't remember the airline. It might have been JetBlue or something, and it was a flight out of Long Beach, and we were getting on the plane or sitting there, and it was getting close to departure, and some guy was in the wrong seat, close to where I was sitting, so I sort of picked up on what was going on. Anyway, he claimed that he had specifically booked this seat because he had, like a replacement leg or knee joint or something, but the flight attendant wanted him to sit in another seat, and he was insisting, and he was showing the boarding card, and then she said, "You are a disruptive passenger," and
got him taken off.
Well, yeah, he got sort of hustled. I think he was taken off. He was sort of hustled away into another part of the cabin. They had a little division thing.
Oh, okay.
But he disappeared, and I thought, yeah, the guy had a point, but they don't give a rat's. You're just you're annoying us. You're slowing us up. We've had a long day. Get rid of him.
Yeah.
And I just hope that didn't happen there. But anyway, that's that story. But here's another real interesting one, and I'm reading from an article out of the News Talk ZB website by Barry Soper, who's their parliamentary guy. Anyway, I'm commenting on the summit held in Auckland yesterday, the China Business Summit, and Kiwi businesses are complaining that it's hard to do business in China. Yeah, right. You only just discovered that. But he writes here that difficulty of doing business there was probably best highlighted by Air New Zealand's Chief Executive Christopher Luxon, who gave a good example of how uneven the playing field is for our national carrier. He says they're forced to contend with what is an oxymoron, asymmetric competition. An oxymoron, asymmetric competition. I guess that's the oxymoron, where there may be two competitors, but they're totally uneven. Our airline has lost $100 million in 13 years it's been flying to China, he said, essentially because it's been competing in the Chinese market with government-affiliated airlines. Well, they knew that, right? In an environment stacked against this country. I'm not sticking up for China, but everyone knew that. And obviously he's saying the large-scale businesses can afford to run at a loss flying here, where he says they have unfettered access. And here's the point. He says for the past 4 years, Air New Zealand's been trying without success to double the number of slots in and out of Shanghai and to change the timing, which would allow it to fly Chinese passengers into South America. Remember we talked about those opportunities when they sparked up? And of course, but you've got to get the timing right, because if they want to fly on Air New Zealand, they have a 12-hour stopover in Auckland, and that's just too long, right? Too long.
Yeah.
So now we have a free trade agreement, And I see that just in the last day or so, Trump has, or it looks like the Chinese have reneged on paper, signed off concessions in their trade negotiations, actually welched on the deal, and he's putting up tariffs to 25% Friday, I think, their time. I mean, I wonder if we should be doing this sort of business if it's not reciprocated. How come all of their airlines can fly in here, no problem, unfettered, like Luxon says? He's got a point. And then they make it difficult for us.
Yeah, well, a free trade agreement between New Zealand and China is like a barnacle on a whale, really, isn't it? They don't really care.
Well, in that case, you say, what's the point? But maybe there's more for us to gain in other areas, and our carrier takes a hit. But, I mean, it's a smart move going to South America, and Asia is a potential source of passengers for that. But you can't have them sitting around for 12 hours.
No, you can't. But, yes, well, maybe they want New Zealand to dance a little bit more to their tune, and they might give them a few slots. But it's difficult for China. In China, the airline and most industries are an extension of the state, right? And China might be saying to the New Zealand government, "Well, lean on your airline to do more for us," and New Zealand might be saying, "Well, we can't. It's not our airline. We can ask them, and they can decline." Well,
no. This is another point. Luxon saying that he wants the government to get in there and put a bit of pressure on. And the Barry Soper, who wrote the article, is saying that, and I agree, it seems fair enough because we own 53% of that damn airline.
Well, but they pretend not to, eh?
She apparently, it says here, there's the bird. Jacinda Ardern goes through with her dismissing it as an operational issue for Luxon. No, it's a international trading issue.
Yeah. Yes, it is, but if they decide it's an operational issue, that's an operational issue. Suck it up.
I mean, if you were the Prime Minister, what's wrong with picking up the phone to Li Keqiang? I like that. It's got the sound of money. And say, hey, listen here, man. Hey, we've been trying for how many years to get these slots in Shanghai? We got 53% of this airline. We're not happy. Okay? We're not happy.
I remember it would have been about 10 years ago when New Zealand, announced all these. They were going to fly to Beijing. They were going to fly to Shanghai. I think they were going to fly to Hainan or one of those other cities. And you're just thinking, really? Why? And now they spent 10 years or 13 years and lost $100 million. You got to say, well, at what point are you going to stop? Because you're just chucking good money after bad.
Well, or you go back to the government, your shareholder, and say, hey, how about a bit of compensation here? We're flying the flag. We're getting an unfair deal. You're not helping out.
Yes, well, maybe there's that as well. But surely a business would have said, we're losing money on this, we're going to stop doing it. And then the government might have said, oh, well, we really want you to fly to China. And he'd say, well, fair enough. We will fly to China. And this is what it's going to cost you. Yeah, it's going to cost you this.
The other thing we could do is we could say, okay, we'll only let Chinese carriers come in at the frequency and on the least convenient slots at the ratio that you let us go in.
Unfortunately, China can then say, well, we're going to cut our milk purchase from New Zealand by 1%.
This is where I don't know if it's a good idea. But anyway, that's for another day. Yeah. But if you can't, if you can't even get your national carrier with just a couple of extra slots, come on, that's all it is.
Well, this comes back to the discussion we've got to have in another show about the use and purpose of so-called national carriers anymore. But anyway,
well,
keep putting that off.
No, but we do, don't we? We've been talking about this for a few things. But here's the thing: if you've got a national carrier, and it has a legacy of the way it came about and evolved, and it is part of the fabric of who we are, of a nation, and it's been a nation building thing. That's why I'm so into the other thing. You own 53% of it, and that Koru, and every time I get on the plane, it's like I'm in New Zealand already. That sort of thing. Then you use that instrument. You use it in a smart way.
I agree. Or don't have a national carrier, and don't worry about
or
stuff
don't
like
have
that.
one. And if I mean, I know nothing about negotiating with the Chinese. What do I know? But my gut tells me that if I've got that, when I'm in the room trying to negotiate these things, and I've got that entire legacy, hey, Chinese people, we were flying way before you. Okay,
Well,
it didn't come down
They might dispute that. They might have had a guy flying around on a dragon-shaped kite in the 16th century.
Well, yeah, okay, maybe. But the thing is, we're not Johnny-come-latelys. We sit here with skin in the game, with heritage, man. We pioneered long routes like you wouldn't believe, way before.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Don't think you got some sort of schoolboy or girl at the table here.
No. Well, you kind of do. Yeah, Air New Zealand's done fantastically, and it has been a nation-building, company. It's been of immeasurable value to New Zealand, but at the moment they're selling a lot of milk into China, and if the Chinese turn around and say, we'll buy our milk somewhere else.
That's the problem. That's the problem. There's no Chinese walls.
No.
There's nothing to keep those things separated out, and that's where you can't go crazy. But you would expect some sort of advocacy. Like I say, a couple more slots at Shanghai. It's not hard. It's not a huge ask.
No. It's quid pro quo, and we've got a free trade agreement. How's about you give us a useful slot?
Otherwise, we're going to have, issues of fairness this end, which we'll have to do something about. I mean, you can't just bend over and take it. Come on.
Well, that comes down to many things with China, though. So, I have no issues with Chinese citizens going anywhere and buying a house if they feel like it. But I often think that I'd like to go and buy a flat in Beijing.
Well, it's not reciprocated. This is the problem. It's
not that often, actually.
Well, but the reciprocation seems to be an issue. I mean, I understand also that the two different cultures here. Yeah, I get all that. But hey, if you're going to have a close relationship, free trade deal, obviously tourism's part of what we do. We've got an airline that's been flying long routes for longer than anyone can remember, almost. Come on,
No, you're right.
We want to be able to depart out of there, 7 hours earlier. Is that okay? Come on.
For some reason, they don't seem to want to do it.
No, because they don't want us to have the business, probably.
Yeah. And those Chinese airlines, actually, in inverted commas, they don't even choose the aircraft they buy.
No, it's bought centrally.
They're bought centrally and apportioned out because the Chinese government wants to play the major constructors, manufacturers off against each other. It's not real. It's not a real business. A lot of them run at a loss.
Basically, New Zealand's in a tight spot because China is having a rough time with the US. China will be saying to New Zealand, "We've got a free trade deal. We've got all this stuff. Which side are you on?" That'll be what's going on at the moment. And I know it's a tough situation for the government people to be in. I get that as well. But
New Zealand should stop flying there then. So, unless we're making money, let's just stop.
Well, that's the thing. Pull out.
Yeah. And start making slots difficult. But Air New Zealand doesn't sell the slots, you see. It's the Auckland Airport Company, which makes quite a lot of money, and I don't think they give a rat's ass who they sell slots to.
Well, the government can easily say, okay, we're going to change the regs again. We're going to start. We're going back to we're going to go to a slot allocation system again.
The funny thing is they could. The government stepped in to stop Emirates buying a chunk of the airport, didn't they? Wasn't it Emirates wanted to buy the airport?
They wanted to buy half the airport. And I think that would have been that would have been one of the sales I would have supported. But anyway.
Yeah, that would have been I think that would have been a very good sale.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so
in New Zealand. Yeah. Anyway. Yes. Exactly. Anyway.
I think New Zealanders need to go a little harder sometimes. That's my gut. We need to be. Sometimes we need to be a bit brutal in a nice, respectful way. But it's like, oh my God, we made a sale. Oh, we're not worthy. We're not worthy. No, we're totally worthy. And we need to have that sort of confidence. But anyway, maybe they do. Maybe they're in a very tough spot with the trade situation as it is at the moment. Huawei, that's a big problem.
Wow, is it? It's that whole 5G thing's very interesting. It turns out that The Americans have adopted a 5G standard, which is not the same as the rest of the world. There's no American company that supplies the switching gear that supports the standard that the rest of the world has embraced. There's a Chinese company. There's 2 European companies. I think there's a Japanese company. There's no American company that supply it. And so the Americans are getting all bent out of shape because one of the biggest suppliers of this new 5G technology is Huawei. When I say biggest, the Europeans are pretty big as well. And they don't want, they just don't want people to buy Huawei. They're all upset about it. The British.
Well, I see the defense minister got fired for allegedly leaking details from a meeting over Huawei, and he says it wasn't him. Theresa May just kicked him right out. There are problems behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, there was an interesting article last week. I think Bloomberg, an American mouthpiece, perhaps, had this report that Vodafone Italy, they have Huawei equipment, that there were backdoors installed, and it was actually Vodafone came out and said, no, there's no backbone, there's no backdoors installed. That's all rubbish. There was a port left open, which we opened to allow external engineers access into the system, but we've shut it now. And there was no back door that we can ascertain. GCHQ, the British, what we call it, spying agency, they reckon they've analysed the Huawei equipment, and they say we can't find any back doors into the system. And they say, even if there are, we run it in such a way that we would detect any traffic going in and out. But there's back doors in the regular phone system.
Well, of course, that's the ridiculous situation, and I mean everything is hackable. But they can turn on your microphone, they can record your conversations. NSA, from what I've read, archives every single electronic pulse signal, whatever.
And I mean, you don't need back doors in telecom switches when you got Facebook.
Yeah, well, that's right, and
people type it all in there.
They do it for you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Anyway, so I think it's probably, we don't see at the surface layer, we don't see everything that's bubbling along underneath, and it sounds like things are pretty tense behind the scenes on the trade front. Anyway, and we'll be caught up in that somehow. Have you seen have you looked at Rami RC's YouTube site? Martin, the guy makes the.
I do occasionally. I haven't looked lately, but he's made some amazing models.
He's done an Air New Zealand Dreamliner now.
Oh yeah, I didn't watch the video, but I've seen. I've seen the brief snippet of the video.
Not bad. Yeah, well, the things are looking more realistic all the time. Gosh, those little turbine engines are fantastic, aren't they?
Yeah, he uses ducted fans. Yeah,
electric ones.
If you guys, if you're interested in that type of thing, go and look at a site. It's Flight Test, FLITETEST, and they do these quick build kits of warbirds and all this type of thing, and they build it out of that, similar to what Rami RC uses, but these guys are even more basic. It's foam board that you buy from the dollar store, right?
Right.
And they do these quick build kits, which it's all been pre-laser cut. Man, some of the planes they build are amazing.
Yeah.
They are absolutely amazing. They cost like $40, and they sell the engines and everything. And they're all electric engines, right? And so one of the guys who used to run for Flight Test, or he used to do a lot of work for Flight Test, Peter Sripol, Sripol, he's building electric microlights now that he flies.
Great.
And they made out of like core flute, and he welds together a steel frame, but the surfaces on the previous one was core flute. You know that plastic core flute bag that they make the mail trays out of?
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and he's flying around in it.
Yeah, it's really that the whole thing's coming on. Some of those bigger RC models now are looking just. You have to look twice sometimes.
Oh, and there's a German guy. There's a couple now, but the video I tend to watch is I've forgotten his name. He's got a turbo fan. So he's made
an actual one.
A tiny hot core with a big fan on the front. And this thing's blowing trees, like whipping trees back, and it's 10 meters behind this thing he's got set up on the bench. It's just amazing. There's also very interesting videos showing these. It seems to be particularly popular in Germany, and they're indoor radio control planes, and they are ultra light.
Yes, I think I've seen those too, and they they fly really, and they fly them indoors, like in gyms and things.
And this one guy's got an A300. And it's got all the surfaces. It's got the spoilers, the slotted flaps,
amazing. Yeah.
The Kruger flaps on the front, the way the gear goes, everything. But you can lift it, with a finger.
Wow! Yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing what people are doing these days. There's another one on flight test. They made a plane as flat as they could make it. And they put one of these 360-degree cameras on it, and they then fly it around.
Oh, gee.
And the footage it's taking is just unbelievable.
Actually, speaking of that, there's been a few good videos popping up recently of cameras attached to eagles.
Down the wing particularly.
Yeah, and between the wings. And you see how steady their head stays. It's like it's on a gyro platform or something like that. But all that small camera gear now is just creating so many great opportunities to.
Talking about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Well, I noticed that people are starting to put cameras on there. Rami RC had, I think, a camera looking over the wing of one of his planes. So you see the flaps coming out and things like that.
It's incredible what they do. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. But talking about the eagle's head steady, there's a friend of mine who I met when I was living in the States. He's a neurologist. And one of the things he did for his studies was he studied the self-leveling mechanism of the eye.
Wow.
Our eyes.
Yeah.
So when we walk, walking is apparently incredibly jerky, but we don't know it because our eyes level constantly. But he says if you inject the muscles around the eyes and you disable the muscles around the eyes, and they stop self-leveling, he says you basically can't walk.
Yeah, imagine the views all over the place. Like
he says it's really, really hard for these people to walk. Yeah, because he says it's very hard. Yeah. And he wrote. He did his. Like when he was qualifying, that was the thing he did. He did the neurology of deep diving and self-leveling eyes. Not sure how they're connected, but that's what he did.
When you watch the footage, it's like everything else is moving and the head is absolutely still. It's like the entire rest of the world is. It's really interesting to watch. I see this update on the Sukhoi things come through, and it mentions what you just mentioned. Russian regional carrier Yanal Airlines has said it's cancelling its planned purchase after the crash. They got 10 on order. They cited here the general director, Vasily Kryuk, says his company was dropping plans to buy 10 more Superjets because servicing costs were too high.
Yeah, that's
They've got 15 already.
That tends to be a pretty common theme.
Yeah. Yeah, always that service and backup. In fact, you can see that's happened through. I remember watching a program once on the Caravelle and how they tried to get that into the US, and it was a great plane. United, I think, bought some, but they just couldn't service it.
No. The service it to the level expected
by the carrier, by the Americans.
Yeah, and minimum downtime and line replaceable units and all this type of thing. And I think that'll happen with a lot of these. A lot of people can build a plane, but keeping hundreds and hundreds or thousands of them flying all the time is a it's a logistical problem that very few companies can ever get on top of.
Yeah, to have that level of first of all, the network of even just supplying parts quickly.
And what they make the mistake, they say, well, it only cost me $1,000 to make it. I'll sell it for $1,200, and that should cover the support. But actually, if it costs you $1,000 to make it, and you want to support it for 10 years, you probably need to sell it for about $8,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the space front, just quickly, I see that the Dragon capsule exploded.
Geez, it didn't.
Back on the 3rd of May.
It left. It didn't so much explode as to just not be there anymore.
Yeah.
It was just completely obliterated.
Yeah.
And they were very uncharacteristically quiet about that.
It was totally destroyed during the test. The admission comes from the company's vice president, and what do they say about this? Issue arose from the Dragon Super Draco thrusters.
Now, not funnily enough, interesting enough, NASA, in their press release about that, were very supportive, saying stuff like this happens, which is why we test, and we are very confident that SpaceX will get on top of the problem and solve it for the next one. Then they launched a Dragon capsule, not the Crew Dragon, but the Cargo Dragon, on Friday.
Yeah, the Crew Dragon's got that system like they had on the Apollo, the escape system at the top of the rockets, right?
System on it,
that blows the top. Yeah, and it didn't work,
No, but then they went ahead and launched a regular 9 on... And did you watch the landing?
I didn't see that landing, no.
Oh, that was good, because they had a very clear shot looking down the rocket as it actually hit the barge, and they had a fantastic infrared shot as it came down through the atmosphere.
Okay.
And then there's a beautiful picture on Twitter where a guy took a long exposure of the whole thing, showing the takeoff, the stage separation, the boost back, the re-entry burn, and the landing burn, all in one photo.
Crikey.
Yeah, no, it was. I must admit, I'm kind of addicted to watching those launches. I try and watch as many of them as I can live.
And I think the Blue Origin was launched within the
night.
Yes,
the little one.
I watched that, and that came back down and landed okay as well.
Yeah, New Shepard. But that booster that came back on Friday at SpaceX, that's the 39th one. And another interesting fact is NASA had a vested interest in this one because they bought the next 2 launches off that particular booster.
Okay, so that's the actual hardware right there.
They're saying we want to fly that another 2 times.
Crikey.
That one.
Yeah.
So it shows you how things have changed. I mean, that just blows me away. That they land
so
those things.
SpaceX again is what talking about Tesla before. Is that a vertically integrated company as well?
Yeah, done the whole thing. Yeah,
they 3D print. I see the combustion chamber of the rocket. Yeah, so it's the Super Draco.
Well, the one that blew up. Yeah,
and it's 3D printed.
Yeah, well, they'll probably stop doing that.
Liquid-fueled abort system, and they say, the article here I'm reading says that's unusual.
Yeah.
So
they'll probably go back to welding soon.
Yeah. But anyway, plenty of activity in space. We might even get to ride there before we're done,. At this rate,
unlikely.
Well, you
never know.
I guess what's Branson's thing, Spaceship One, he's talking about that coming down to the 20K price range as they go on.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than now. But anyway, okay, has anything... I should bring our birds home just quickly?
You should.
Okay, so I can't say too much because I don't want to get in the way of work in progress at the Brazilian end, but our effort to have this court decide on the DC-8 has become a bigger picture thing now, and it's going to involve more derelict aircraft sort of piggybacked on this effort around the country than just ours, Martin. So we hopefully have precipitated, is that the word?
You're an agent for change.
We're an agent for change, and that's a good thing because that brings the pressure way more to bear on getting this done. And I'm not going to make any time frame calls because I actually haven't done that, but I've always said it, not too far. But that whole thing shifted gears, and what that means if this all comes off is that there's a lot of bargaining power with officialdom in Brazil to go to next level. So that's interesting. And we've also found out that right next to the DC-8 is a fully equipped still 737-200. So obviously all the parts, I mean, putting the big picture together here, all the parts you need to put on the airframe, the original airframe that we're after, that's in North Carolina, that is missing everything, including flight instruments, is sitting right next to one of the planes we want. So that's a very cool thing.
That's very cool. So what? It's complete.
It's complete. It's even got the engines on it, though we've already got some engines, but our ones can work. We could fire them up if we wanted. They still go. But everything else is on there, like all the flying surfaces, the floor panels, the flight instruments, the cabin linings, the rudder, all the inspection plates, because a lot of them have been removed from the airframe. Undercarriage, the original undercarriage go back on, or the A7. At the moment, it's like a jury rig thing. So that is a fantastic thing. And of course, it costs money for them to get rid of that. It's not our responsibility, even though it's next to our aircraft. What's the difference between it going to the dump with parts on it or without parts on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, and they've kept the door shut. There's no jungle in it?
Oh, there'll be this and that in it. Apparently, the DC-8 is full of mud.
Oh.
But one of the JT3 engines is in the cabin, we're told. That's the one that's missing, obviously. So that's an interesting thing, and so we're just waiting for that to happen. And I'm now chasing down getting copies, technical drawing copies for DC-8 and DC-10 and 737, and we're talking through Bob Bogash, who's the Museum of Flight's archivist, or one of them, to their historical person, their archive person, to try and get copies of appropriate drawings, so some thinking can start to go into dismantling, right?
That's great.
So that's where we're at, but people are still supporting, and we just need to get this thing sorted, this legal thing sorted out, and then we go to another level. I see in Australia, Martin, the Founders Museum are turning the first sod on their new roof that's going to be put over the 7.4 and, well, the area that. And I think there's room for expansion as well. You've been to the museum, so you can visualise this. Over where the 7.4 is and the 7.0.
Yeah. And
I think John Travolta's 7.0 is coming there as well, I believe.
Okay.
So that is a roof that's been funded by a grant from the Australian government. It's in the millions. Pretty huge thing. So it's good to see that they're valuing this sort of thing, and they're going to be starting.
Given by the entry fee they charge at that Founders Museum, the Australian government probably only needs to give them about $10.
I know that people complain about that, but still, if you just think about the artifacts, it's better that they're undercover, right? So,
when I was there looking at the Catalina, and this old guy, he'd actually driven down from Darwin. He was on his way to Brisbane, and he was looking over the plane. And then he started opening the doors and climbing in, and he said, for $48, they're not keeping me out of this thing.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, that's up to that museum. I'm thinking of it more from the protecting the artifacts. But, I've seen people make comments about entry fees and the cost of that experience. There you go. I guess they... It
was good, though. It was good. Wollongong's good, too. Wollongong's real good.
Right. Well,
and Moorabbin's good down in Victoria near Melbourne. That's actually awesome, that one.
I mean, it's good that they've got their first ever jetliner. I mean, thank God someone recovered that, and that was a big deal. And the airline supported it, right? Qantas supported it.
No, that's good. It is good. And Australia seemed to have done or been how do you say, more willing to recognise the role that method of transportation has had in building Australia. And
they gave away the 7.4. I think it's EBQ. I've got footage of that aircraft at Auckland when it was still flying, by the way, that aircraft. The first 7.0, and they got another one coming back, and Qantas gave them another museum, a 400, just gave it to them.
Yeah.
Flew it in.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. We've been talking a long time.
We have.
And plenty will be happening in the next week or two. We'll be back with some more. I know I said we would get guests in, and we sort of will, but I don't know about you, Martin. I've been so busy with things happening and furious pace of life that, and everyone else seems to be the same.
Busy being busy.
Busy being busy, plenty of issues around. It's going to be really interesting to... How long do you think it'll take before they work out what happened to that Superjet? Shouldn't take too long, should it?
No, it won't take too long, no.
Yeah. Do you think this might finish the program?
Yes.
Do you think it'll kill it? The Superjet's dead now.
Well, it's been limping along sort of in life support for a while now. I don't think this will. Nah, I think that's pretty much it.
You don't
Pity,
think
because by all accounts it's a good little plane.
You don't think Boeing will take it over?
No, they've got enough problems at the moment.
They missed the C series. Anyway, all right. So that's our discussion for this first fortnight, I guess, of May. Can you believe it's May already, Martin?
I can't actually.
Wow, what happened there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's goodbye from me in Auckland, New Zealand, and
goodbye from me in sunny Brizzy.
See you later.
See ya.